Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to Cross Wires. It's James here, and this week we have a fantastic episode. If you're like me and you have fond memories of spending all your pocket money down at the arcade, especially when you're on holiday, maybe you're at Haven Holidays and you're in the arcade and you want to play Outrun or Michael Jackson's Moonwalk or Thriller. There was one Michael Jackson game, and I just remember it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why the arcade is so nostalgic for people, a little bit more about where we stand now with the arcade, and also want to talk to our guest about something awesome that's happening in some mill down in Gloucestershire. So please welcome to the show, Alex from Nintendo Arcade.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. So, Alex, obviously, first of all, another shout out to Neil, because I emailed you off the back of one of your actually off the back of Neil's video, and said, "Hey, Alex, it'd be really cool to get you on the show." And then I get a message in Discord from Neil saying, "Don't worry, James, I've vouched for you to Alex." So thank you.
Good guy. Yeah, I've had a lot of people asking me after that video about certain things, so it's all good. It's all good. I love it. I enjoy it. I enjoy talking about video games. So it's a great opportunity to express myself, on a podcast.
Absolutely. So, Alex, before we get into a little bit of the arcade, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself, maybe where your story started and, maybe what your gaming pedigree is?
Yeah, so I'm from London. I'm from Twickenham. Grew up in Twickenham, the home of English rugby. Not that I was really into rugby, but I was kind of forced to play it really at school because every other school in that borough was playing rugby. My first experience with video games really is like probably most people going on holiday and going to a seaside town and seeing these little amusements that were on the promenade there and seeing back then, I don't know, it was probably a lot of electrical mechanical games, not many video games. They were fun and I enjoyed going in them. My dad was never that keen, but I forced my parents to take me in there and thoroughly enjoyed myself, And then I remember going around to one of my dad's friend's house and he had a little Pong machine.
Oh, yeah.
Black and white Pong machine. I remember playing that and actually loving that game. We played that all night long and took back lots of fun memories playing that game. And it wasn't really until Space Invaders came along that really changed my life, really, because it's responsible for all of this around me. We used to go to Heathrow Airport. Me and my friend Paul, we used to go to Heathrow because we were keen plane spotters. And that was when plane spotting was cool. When you used to go and watch Concorde take off.
Oh, yeah.
And they had like a canteen area and a spotting area that you could watch the planes from, but also had a couple of arcade machines in there, and Space Invaders was one of them. And I remember playing it in there for the first time. And also at my local swimming baths, they had a Space Invaders machine in there. And I remember queuing up around the block to play it. Outside
just to be clear,
just
for anyone concerned, that was outside of a pool area, not like you didn't just jump out of the pool.
It wasn't in the swimming pool itself. It was in the sort of foyer area.
Good.
And that's where the weirdest places they put these machines. They put them in places like there was no health and safety back then. Do you know what I mean? Kids walking out the pool with wet feet. Or let's just tread over the mains cable.
Oh, absolutely.
But it was the machine itself blew us away, and it wasn't just the game; it was the artwork and how the machine was put together. Because it was a little bit of an illusion. It's called Pepper's Ghost. It's got a half mirror in there, and it's an old way of creating illusion. So there's a monitor at the bottom, and it goes up through a half mirror, which is then projected onto a background, and it gives the illusion of depth. It's called Pepper's Ghost. It's an old illusion they were doing in the 1800s, and they used it in these arcade machines. And as kids, we couldn't work it out how it created this depth. And we used to go around the back of the machine to see how it worked, and we were just totally blown away, and queued up for ages to play it, only to last like a minute and then queue up again. And it kind of changed us, really. And then you started seeing little handheld games appear in toy shops, Woolworths and stuff. And it was kind of a way of taking Space Invaders home with us with these little handheld games from Grandstand, and all those other makers of the time. So those were my first experiences with video games. And then I remember getting a Sinclair Spectrum for Christmas, 48K. 1982 must have been somewhere around then, and started collecting games. So my collecting starts in 1982, and I've still got all my original Spectrum games that I brought with my paper round money. Every week I'd spend all my paper round money on a Spectrum game, go home, and it was normally an arcade port onto the Spectrum, and it was usually rubbish. But, we were living it in our bedrooms, the fun of the arcades. And then I guess going forward a bit faster, I left school in 87, got out of video games, and then got back into it in 91 when the Super Nintendo came out. And it was running. I remember seeing Street Fighter running on the Super Nintendo. I thought it was incredible, absolutely incredible. And then for the first time, we were actually seeing arcade ports that were actually really faithful to the arcade games, and that changed everything. And ever since then, I've been a bit of a 16-bit collector, arcade collector. I guess I've been collecting arcade games for about 12 years. So I've been in the hobby about 12, 13 years. I'm a member of a couple of forums, UKVAC and Jammer Plus. Well, that's gone now, but I was a member of that. And yeah, I've just met like-minded people that are into the hobby, that remember the fun times, the good times as a kid, And it's opened up a whole world of friendships for me. It really has.
I was speaking with Dan and Ravi from Retro last week, and that's one of the things that they highlighted is the community around Retro is, I wouldn't say unlike anything else, but it's such a strong community. I've met generally some wonderful people and had so many wonderful guests on this show who are a part of that community. I'll say it again, Crosswires is not intentionally a retro show, but some of my favourite episodes have been with retro content because it brings back my memory. So putting aside the 16-bit era just for a moment, because there are some great little gems in there. What is it, do you think, about the arcade machines that draw people to put their coins in? You said, obviously, with Space Invaders, it wasn't just the game, it was the artwork. And it's one of the things I've always noticed is that, obviously, I guess, do they call it, I think in emulation we call it attract mode, but the idea that these banners, these panels are to attract you to come and play the game.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, the cabs back then were, with an arcade machine, it's all about the lights and the artwork. That's what kids love. They love pushing buttons, don't they? They come up to it, they don't even know what they're doing. They just press a button. They're all brightly coloured. They've got these fantastic characters, and kids just are drawn into that machine, regardless of what the game is. They find out what the game is after they've seen the machine, And that's what it was like for us kids back then, and it was a wonderful time of pioneers, really. They didn't really know, a lot of the companies back then didn't really know which way the video game industry was going. They were literally just trying every little avenue they could to win over kids' coins, and that meant that you had all these video games with different control mechanisms and different ways of drawing you in, whether it be a half mirror, whether it be twin sticks, whether it be a steering wheel, whether it be skis, a pair of skis on some arcade machines, everything, you name it, they've done it to draw kids in. For me, you could put an arcade cabinet in a room on its own, and that'd be like a piece of art for me. It would just stand out on its own in the Tate Gallery, and it'd be like, wow, that is art for me. I love it. And this is what I love about the hobby, because there's so many different angles you can come at it from. You can come at it from a gamer's point of view. I've done lots of game room tours, gone around to people's houses, and everyone collects or does something different in the hobby. Whether they're tech guys, maintenance guys that love playing around with the electronics and fixing things. You've got the guys that just love to go for high scores, You've got the guys that like to restore the cabinets. There's so many different ways that you can come at this hobby and meet like-minded people, But at the end of the day, we all like the same thing, And
I think that's just fascinating. I see the passion. One of the things I said to you before we started recording is, obviously watched a few of your videos, and just your passion just comes through, and it's something again that's seen the retro scene. It's just people's passion. So let's talk a little bit about some of the innovations in arcade. Obviously, Space Invaders using Pepper's Ghost, which I know Disney use a lot in their theme park rides for some of the illusion. I think like the Haunted Mansion uses a Pepper's Ghost effect for the ghosts. And as you said, it gives that depth. If you were to, I mean, obviously putting you on the spot a little bit here, but if I were to ask you to maybe pick, let's say 2 or 3 of the most innovative games, maybe across the span from the early 80s right through to, I mean, for me, I'd say, I would argue, and please correct me if I'm wrong, arcade probably peaked early 2000s, late 90s.
Well, for me, the arcades died out when the 16-bit consoles came about, because really we were the kids that were in the classic era of arcades that were putting money into machines, and then we suddenly found out that we could play the games and bigger and better games at home, so we stopped going down the arcade. So for me, from my point of view, the arcades died out around about the late 80s. And they came back again. They had a bit of a resurgence again when Street Fighter came back in. You had new kids on the block coming in playing that game, getting good at the fighters. But I like to play them at home. So for me, it's around about the late 80s. So for me, the classic era for me is 78 to around about 89. That's my era. They're the games I love because they were innovators. They were pioneers. They were doing things differently. And you had dedicated cabinets then with all the artwork before Jammer came along and made it kind of a universal thing. And then you saw the decline of the dedicated machines, and it just got a little bit boring, in the arcades, not at home.
That's a really interesting point, yeah. And as you said, Jammer is one. So Jammer is something that, correct me if I'm wrong, most modern arcade machines. So from that point where Jammer came along, the idea is you could have a cabinet with control sticks and buttons.
Yeah.
And the idea would be that you could have boards, I guess the arcade equivalent of cartridges, that you could just interchange into a standard Jammer cabinet. Is that?
Well, what happened was you had the video gaming crash in America, and that affected a lot of the big companies. All of them, in fact. What was happening is they were producing these games so quickly and they couldn't get them out fast enough. And then kids were, the video game industry moves so quickly. We play a game for a little bit, then we want the next one. We want the next one with the better graphics. So kids were constantly looking for the better game to play and stopped playing the old ones. So it left a lot of machines redundant. And it cost a lot of money to make those dedicated machines. So what happened was a lot of the Japanese companies agreed to come together and form a consortium where they all agreed they'd have a universal adapter. So they would fit their PCB, their game board would fit in in a Jammer cabinet. With that that adapter would fit that PCB. So it would save the companies on constantly making these dedicated cabinets of all the artwork. It just meant all you had to do was maybe change the marquee and maybe some side art, and that was it. You didn't even have to do that if you didn't want to. You could just slip the board in. It would fit into a Jammer connector. So a lot of the big companies signed up to it, like Namco. There were companies already doing that. Nintendo had already invented the Versus system. So they didn't really get affected by the video game crash. They were quite successful. They had the Versus system. They had the Play Choice 10. And then other companies like Sega jumped on board with the Megatech system, and realised, they were missing out. So they invented their system. And then eventually everyone else thought, okay, this is the way to go. It's just a lot cheaper than constantly making these dedicated machines with all the artwork, unique controls. There were still companies making these dedicated machines, but they got bigger. They turned into gun games, and obviously driving games had to be dedicated. But that's what you still see in the arcade today. You see driving games and gun games, don't you? Because they need those controls.
I remember, one of my favorite, we talk about classic games, Daytona and Sega Rally being those classic examples. Some of the motorbike games, like those 4-up, you and 3 of your mates sat on replica motorcycles.
Yeah.
looking like absolute idiots.
Yeah.
Racing. And then, as you said, anything that's maybe a bit more custom, but, like the big units. I'm trying to think of some examples of really big, like huge arcade, like the enclosed.
What ones you see today or back then?
Yeah, or like in the 90s, because that's my, I'm a little bit younger.
In the 90s, yeah. Well, I guess Outrun was a big dedicated machine.
Yeah.
I mean, Sega were doing the Scalar games, so you had Super Hang-On, you had Space Harrier, but that was sort of 87, 88, around that era. The 90s for me is Jammer games, and I love Jammer games, that's why I've got 2 Jammer cabinets here. I put a lot of my Tower Plan games in there. I love playing those. And they just come as kits. You just got a marquee and that was it, and the PCB and that was it.
So that would mean then, we go back to our seaside town, and let's say that your little amusement arcade on Bournemouth Pier could buy, say, 4 or maybe 10 Jammer machines and just change the games out as they saw felt what was popular at the time.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously with dedicated hardware, you are stuck with, and I guess there is an appeal to that because, correct me if I'm wrong, dedicated hardware, dedicated machines probably have more custom art and custom designs for that game.
Yeah.
Whereas, as you said, you can change the sign pads, you can change the marquee. I think, I've seen that sort of thing where you go in one week and it's, say, Golden Axe, for example, and then later on it's something else. It's maybe
Kung Fu Master or whatever. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. I mean, in the UK, we had a lot more bootleg and Jammer games. The US was king of the dedicated cabinet. In fact, the US, some of the best companies came out of the US in the classic era and made the best dedicated machines, I think. And then the Japanese technology, the Japanese companies slowly caught up and started making boards a lot cheaper. The chips were a lot cheaper. And then you started seeing a lot of Japanese games heading into the market. And that's how the industry evolved, really. It was the Americans that started it all. We've got to thank the moon landings for that, because if it wasn't JF Kennedy investing so much money into NASA and making these chips on such an industrial scale, they wouldn't have been that cheaper in the 70s, if you see what I mean.
I do. No, I see. Yeah, that direct result of the need for,
Yeah, and a lot of the early guys that worked for Atari had jobs at NASA before they worked at Atari. So, these are old guys that are just finding a way that really just playing around with technology, and trying to make money out of it. Weren't really into games.
Well, I mean, even today, we're both recording on Macs, and Steve Jobs worked at Atari.
He did indeed, yeah.
We owe Atari a lot. Let's maybe brush aside certain individuals who don't have the best track record, but Atari as it stands right now with their NFT nonsense.
Yeah.
But some wonderful games and some wonderful memories. Again, I have more memories of maybe 16-bit era games. But when I launched my my RetroPie, I definitely go in and look at some of the arcade games. I'm like, I love things like 1942 and just some of those classics.
Yeah.
So before there's something that you've kind of been involved in, and we'll come to that in a moment in terms of an actual quote unquote lost arcade game. But going back to sort of those iconic games, I'll change it up a little bit. If I were to ask you for maybe a couple of your absolute standout games from that period, so from the 78 up to say 89 period, if maybe we can call this Desert Island Arcade, well, the idea of getting stranded on a desert island with arcade machines.
Have I got a 10 to choose from, or how many have I got to pick?
I'm gonna be kind for time reasons. I'll give you 5 to choose from.
Ooh.
I know.
Okay, it's not too hard actually. Defender, which is a game back in the day I wanted to love, but didn't have enough money to get good at it. Because again, it was all about how much money you had in your pocket. You can only spend so much time on it depending on how much money you had. It's not until you get it in your collection, it's in your ownership, that you can start really getting into the game and finding out how good it really is. And Defender, since it's been in my ownership, has been the game. And I think it's one of those games that when it's played really well, it looks amazing. To watch the top players play it, it looks fantastic. And I got quite good at it. I broke my arm a couple of years ago, and it was the only game I could play in my arcade that actually I could lean my arm on the control panel and play. I couldn't play Robotron anymore because it was too much effort. But Defender seemed to just sort of, I've just played it non-stop the whole time, got quite good at it. So that is definitely my number one game. I love it so much. It's such a cool game. Robotron, another Williams, Eugene Jarvis game, twin stick shooter, an absolute masterpiece. What makes these games good is the risk reward element. It's perfect because as human beings, we get greedy, right?
Yeah.
And that's normally why we die in games because we just,
we
just get one more thing. I'm dead. Whereas if you just leave it, and just take your time around the level, you would have probably got off that level, But Robotron just entices you in to get one more human, rescue one more human. And it's just an absolute classic of a game, a twin-stick shooter game. The sounds, the Williams sounds are just totally out there, totally of that era, Two fantastic games. I've got to include Donkey Kong.
Of course.
One of the first games to have like a damsel in distress and platforms and characters,
And of course, the birth of Mario as a character.
Yeah, Jumpman, as he was called then.
Yes,
yeah. Donkey Kong's a fantastic game. I've got to throw in a couple of, early 90s.
I'll let you have a few more, by all means. Go for it, yeah. I'm not that bad.
There's another game I like called iRobot, which I used to play. It's by Atari, by the way, and it's one of the first games that had polygon graphics. A Dave Feuer game. Very rare game, highly desirable amongst collectors. I used to play it in Twickenham in my local arcade, and I'd love to have that in my collection because that would be one of my other favourite games, but I don't own that. I like Super Hang-On. I think that's a fantastic driver, if you want to call it a driver, even though it's a motorbike game. It's got great music, draws you in, plays really well. It's very forgiving. It rewards a skillful rider. It's just a joy to play. I think it's one of the best drivers out there. I think it's better than Outrun. I think it's really good. I love Asteroids Deluxe. I love Tempest, and I'll throw in a Tower Plan game, Outzone. I love Outzone. That's a brilliant shooter. It just continues on from what Commando did, Capcom's Commando, and just does it 10 times better. It's just brilliant. So there you go. There's my lot.
I like it. Now, one game we didn't mention, Mer, is one but you've kind of been quite involved with in terms of, it's kind of like Raiders of the Lost Arcade, this. And this is now, I believe it's an unreleased, is correct, Nintendo arcade game.
Yeah, it was an unreleased game. It's such a long story, this, and such a deep rabbit hole. How much time have we got?
Oh, we've got time. I mean, maybe give us the I was going to say the omnibus edition, but that'd be even longer. Give us the
Well, let me rewind. So I've been in the hobby 13 years. When I started in the hobby, I wanted to collect every Nintendo game. There was a lot of American collectors out there that had all of the Nintendo uprights. But they didn't have a lot of the games that we got in the UK, strangely enough. And I think it was because this was before. See, Nintendo of America was almost a different company. It's the same. It's like a sister company from the Japanese company, if you like.
Well, they had different presidents, didn't we?
Yeah, and it was set up in 1980. But Nintendo were making games before 1980, but they had a different distributor. In fact, they had a few different distributors. Sega was one of them. Sega distributed a lot of Nintendo games because Sega were in the arcades long before Nintendo were. So they knew how the avenues to get into all the arcades. So Nintendo went to Sega and said, look, we've made this game. Can you distribute it? And they said, yes. So they distributed some really rare Nintendo games from the get-go, And I started finding some of them. I had a very rare Space Launcher. I've got a very rare Nintendo Sheriff, which is one of the rarest games in the world.
Wow.
There's only about 3 or 4 of them known to exist. And mine's probably in the best condition one out there. It's just amazing. And it's the first game by Shigeru Miyamoto.
Oh, yes, yep.
So that is my pride in my collection. So I started collecting all these really rare and obscure Nintendo games. But there was one game that allured me. It was Sky Skipper. And I'd seen it in a couple of books. Florent Georges did a fabulous book of Nintendo's history, and he mentions it in his book. Yeah, he had a couple of pictures, but there was no real photographs of the game. Nothing existed on the internet. There was nothing out there at all. So I started digging around, researching, and I found a guy in Sweden that claimed he had a Sky Skipper board, a PCB. But what it was playing Popeye. So on every PCB, you've got a serial number. And Popeye's got its own serial number, but this had a different serial number. It was TNX01. And it's the way the ROMs are set out on the board. He could figure it out because the game was dumped in MAME. Okay, Sky Skipper was in MAME. He could figure it out that it was Sky Skipper originally. And it had been reverse engineered to play Popeye. And he was trying to reverse engineer it back to Sky Skipper, but he hadn't succeeded. And I asked him, would he sell it? He said, yeah, he'd sell it. And he wanted a couple of £100 for it, not a lot. And I had a guy that repaired a lot of my games. I said to him, do you reckon you could reverse engineer it back to Sky Skipper? And he said, no, not without the schematics and not without another board. Because you need two boards to kind of cross-reference, makes it easier. So I forgot about it and didn't buy the board. And it wasn't until about a year later, me and a bunch of UK Vackers, which is the forum, the UK arcade forum, we go on these raids, which is basically we go into an old operator's house or an old amusements by the seaside and buy up all their PCBs. It's not like we don't go in there with balaclavas on.
No, I was going to ask you.
Hold them up.
I've got an image of you lot down on Bournemouth Seafront raiding the arcades now.
Going with a shotgun. It's like, put your hands up. Give me your games.
I've just got a scene of, have you seen Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels with us too?
Yeah, no, it's just basically buy them out really, and they're happy to sell them because these are games that no longer make them any money. They've been sitting there on the shelf for 30 years and they just want to make some money and retire. So we went in there and I went up there with my friend Ollie and I joked with Ollie. I said to him, wouldn't it be funny if we found a Sky Skipper in there? And we got in there, met the old boy, he was in his 70s, and he had racks and racks of PCBs on this wall. And Ollie got up there on the ladder and he started passing me down these really rare games like Midway's Tron, Disatron, Atari boards, you name it. All the classic 80s games were there. And then he hands me this board. He says, oh, Alex, it's Popeye. I don't like that game. You have it. Popeye, is it? Okay, listen. I looked on the PCB. And because I knew or had been looking at the guy's one in Sweden, I knew straight away it wasn't a Popeye. It had TNX01 on it, which meant it was a Sky Skipper. And I could not believe it. I could not believe it. Because we joked on the way up there. And I just thought, what are the chances of that? Finding the rarest game on the planet Earth. And we joked about it on the way up. And there I am holding it. And I bought it for £1.
Wow.
All the boards were like £1 each. They were so cheap. It was crazy. So now I've got I've got a board in my hands. I've got this guy in Sweden. So I brought that board off him. Then I went to my friend Mark and said, right now, can you reverse engineer it to Sky Skipper? Cut a long story short, he did it in about 3 months. It took him a while because there was a custom chip on there that caused him some problems. But he did it, I kept going back every couple of weeks, seeing the progress. We had sprites, we had moving graphics, and then suddenly we had a game and it was like, wow. Then I did a video on my channel. So I'm a YouTuber. I've got my own YouTube channel. I did a video on that. Got a bit of attention from that, a lot of attention from US collectors. And then I kind of hit a bit of a brick wall because I didn't know what to do then because I had these 2 boards. I had 2 Sky Skipper boards. What I wanted to do is recreate the cabinet, but I had no information on this cabinet at all. There was a bit of artwork on the internet of a marquee, and then we found some old trade catalogue magazines that were released in Japan. There was a couple of pictures of Sky Skipper in there. So I was going to get an artist to kind of make up the artwork out of what we had, but it wasn't really good enough,
It wasn't the original. It wasn't
original, no. And I had a friend, Whitney, who does the Broken Token podcast. It's a arcade and pinball podcast in America that I befriended. And I mentioned this to him. He said he'd be interested in buying one of the boards. And I thought, okay. Well, I said, well, that's great, Whitney, but what can we do with it? You know, I want to recreate the cabinet. I know it was made, but there's no pictures of it everywhere, but I know it was made. Anyway, one weekend in Louisville, where Whitney's from, he went to a gaming show and Billy Mitchell was there. And Whitney went up to Billy Mitchell and he said, look, my friend's got these boards, this game called Sky Skipper by Nintendo. You wouldn't have known about that, would you? Because we heard rumours that when Billy Mitchell got his world record on Donkey Kong, he got invited to Nintendo of America and they honoured him for getting the world record on Donkey Kong. And we heard rumours that he had played Sky Skipper in the lobby in NOA.
So it had to exist, but the cabinet was there.
It was there. It was a rumour, though. It wasn't like set in stone or anything. We just had to find out through him. And he went, oh my God, there's a name I haven't heard in a long time. He said to Whitney, he said, yep, I played it and I can't believe you found the boards. He said, well, we want to get the art. We've got his boards. We want to recreate this cabinet. We don't know anything about it. We didn't even know it wasn't unreleased. We didn't know anything about this game at this point. So anyway, Billy Mitchell put us in touch with a few ex-Nintendo employees, and they put a good word in for us with Don James, who is the chief executive of NOA. And he dealt with a lot of the arcade games in Nintendo's early years.
Okay.
And he's still there now. He's still head of Nintendo. Basically, I can't remember how it went now. I don't know whether it was Whitney or Billy Mitchell emailed Don James. It's such a long time ago now. It's 5 years ago. But basically he said, look, a couple of good lads here. They've got these Sky Skipper boards. They just want to know whether this Sky Skipper game existed, you know. And he got back to us. Yes, it still exists. It's in the warehouse. If you guys want to come down and see it, you're welcome. I mean, what's your plans? And we said, well, we'd love to scan it. We want to scan the machine and recreate it. He said, well, we need to know proof that you've got his board. So he sent him a link to my video so they verified me as a genuine person with his boards. And they said, yeah, come down. So
wow,
they invited me and Whitney to NOA to scan this machine. I couldn't go at the time, which was absolutely gutting because it would have been one of the best days of my life going in there and seeing it. But Whitney went on my behalf because at this point, Whitney's brought the other PCB. Okay, I sold the other one to him, and he's really helping out stateside. He goes to the lobby, and he sits there with one of the employees, and they tell him the whole story. This game was never released. They made 12 cabinets. They put them on play testing in Washington, D.C., in all the colleges around there, and it only got around 20. There's like a little coin counter inside the cabinet, and it tells you how many times people put money in, and it got like 20,000 plays, which is nothing compared to like Donkey Kong, like the year before. They've got over 100,000. So they decided to scrap it. They destroyed 11 of the cabinets and kept one. And that's the one that's in Nintendo of America today. So Whitney went there, got invited in, met Don James. He let him scan the whole machine, took all pictures inside. It was incredible, absolutely incredible. So with that, with all the artwork vectorized, we were now able to do all the artwork and recreate the cabinet. So that's what we did. Whitney did his first, and he revealed it to the world in Atlanta. We went on stage with Billy Mitchell, Walter Day, and revealed it to the world, this game that never was released because it just didn't fare well. And then I did my UK reveal at the Arcade Club a year later. So he had a Sky Skipper machine and I had a Sky Skipper machine with the two boards that I found running original Sky Skipper hardware. About a year later, Don James released it on the Switch. So it finally got out there to everyone, you know, and that's the story. I'm sure I've missed some bits out, but it's a while ago now.
What a wonderful story, though. And it's great to find those gems. And, you know, I watched the video that you sent me of that reveal, and it's just so fascinating.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're talking about these lost treasures and, you know, being able to experience those. Now, you're working on something at the moment with Neil from RMC. So just for a bit of background, Neil and Heber Electronics at the Mill put out a sort of joint thing saying, hey, because all the team at Heber are now be able to work from home, we've got all this empty space at this gorgeous mill. And I haven't been there, but from all the videos, it is a beautiful old mill. And they were looking for businesses to come in. And I think the idea was it to be maybe related to what Neil was doing.
Yes.
And there was lots of ideas. I remember seeing in the Discord great ideas like, like a Games Master recreation, someone suggested, I think.
Games.
Yeah, like with like a monument to Patrick Moore. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, go on YouTube, search Games Master. It was a classic show. Yeah. And in fact, again, to plug Neil's actually done an interview with Dominic Diamond, who was one of the hosts of that show.
That's right.
But more got focusing back on yourself. So, from what I understand, you've sort of taken up the call. So, what on earth are you doing at the mill? There's trouble in the mill, lad.
Well, I've been watching Neil's channel for a while. It's such a great channel. It really is. He's so professional. What he's done up there with that computer museum is just absolutely incredible. It really is. You've got to go and see it. I just thought, what will complement that best? An arcade. It just come to me straight away. Why wouldn't it? We used to go to the arcade as kids, and then we'd go back home and play the ports on the Spectrum, the BBC, like he's got up in his computer museum, So it just made sense to have an arcade in there. And I was already talking to Neil a little bit. I invited him round here, but I know how busy he is and stuff. But then I approached him with my idea, and he was like, yeah, great. He came round and saw my arcade. He came with Richard as well. And two lovely guys, two very honourable, honest guys.
Yeah.
And I just felt right with them, I just thought they were the best people to do it with. They made me feel confident to do it, safe as well, felt I was in good hands. Because, it's not the best time to start a business up at the moment. Do you know what I mean? I just thought, what, I'm gonna go for this. Because I'm in the building game since I was 16. Since I broke my arm, it's been very difficult for me to work. And I've always wanted to change careers, and this just thought this is the ideal opportunity for me. I'm passionate about what I'm doing. I love talking to people, this is great. So I went for it. So what we're doing is we're creating an arcade museum. And in this place, it's not just going to be an arcade. It's going to be a place where we're actually going to learn something as well as have some fun. And I'm going to try and tell a story from some of the early black and white games. We're hoping to have an Atari Pong in there. We're hoping to have an early Midway Gunfight, which was one of the first games to use a microprocessor. We're hoping to have a Seawolf. We're hoping to have loads of games. My collection is going to be in there. Sky Skipper's going to be in there. That whole story with Sky Skipper. Sheriff will be in there. Such a rare game that is going to be there for people to play, as well as all the classic games. And hopefully tell a story in an arc of the era of the pioneers of video games, right up to where it went into decline with the consoles and started to sort of move out into Jammer and Street Fighter. And that's the sort of point we're going to cut off.
Which makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, I'm getting the impression someone could come into this wonderful museum you're going to have set up and start, at Pong.
Yeah.
And go on a time travel journey through the arcade and through the pioneers. And just like Neil's museum, these are locked behind glass cabinets and are on demo mode.
No, you can play them all. Yeah, you'll be able to play them all. That's what they were made for. I wouldn't have it any other way. There was a couple of people saying, I would loan you cabs, but I want a rope round it. And I said, no, that's not really what we're trying to achieve here. Appreciate you loaning me your cab, I really do, but these machines are social objects. They were made for people to play. I appreciate they don't want them on all the time. In fact, some of the games like Pong, we might only have on for a couple of hours because it is really old. It might not like being heated up for that long. So we might have sort of windows in a day where we say to people, look, Atari Pong's going to be on from 1 till 2 or whatever, 1 till 3, if you want to play it. But, all the other games are going to be on all the time. We've got to have it all on the original hardware as much as possible, because that's the whole point of a museum, isn't it? Keeping the original stuff going.
Absolutely. And, because And that's something we'll actually talk about, is how people can maybe enjoy arcade stuff today. But it sounds like this is going to be a fantastic experience. And I think there's something, as you said, very social about arcade, and seeing, people's names in the high scores.
Yeah.
And just be able to compete with each other.
Yeah, I hope to have like a high score table or on each game. I hope to maybe get Arcade involved, or maybe just have our own high score UK system.
Nice.
We can maybe even link up with other arcades, and people can.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, because it is a great community. People like Andy Palmer, who runs the arcade club, who I know very well. He congratulated me the other day and said all the best. And if you wanted to borrow some games, you're more than welcome to. And that's what the community is about. So if we can link maybe the arcades up, would be cool. Have talks, have people down within the industry, or people that have made a dent in the community, in some way or another, talk about their achievements, for an hour as well. But, and then you go off and play the games. They're the sort of things I want to try and achieve, because it's not a huge space, but it's enough there to tell a story, and hopefully we can rotate the games every 3 months or whatever. And a lot of the games in there are going to be on loan from the community. So it is a community base, a hub. I'm hoping to have a lot of the UK VAC meets there for collectors and anyone else that wants to join. That's the whole thing, get the public involved and get them joined into the hobby,
Excellent. And so obviously we'll keep you all updated, and please do go and subscribe to Alex's channel, because I assume you're going to be doing a lot of video content on the building of this.
Yeah, I've got to do one tomorrow. I've got to do another video. I've got to get a video out once a week now. So I've got a lot
joys of being a YouTuber.
Yeah.
So, Alex, this is exciting, but not everyone has the funds or the ability to collect machines, or maybe even the space, or probably more important, the significant other consent to collect, because these are big machines, and especially, I guess one thing we should probably notice, with this current cost of living crisis, I guess we're also quite expensive to run. Yeah,
they can be. Especially if you don't know how to fix them. I'm not. Put my hands up in the air. I'm not very good at fixing them at all. I've got sausages for fingers because I'm a builder, right? I've got a broken arm that's not really been calibrated properly since it was broken, so it sort of drifts off. So little tiny things, fixing things, I'm not very good at. So I have to have other people do that for me.
But again, that's what we've got a community for, right?
Exactly, and that's where sort of Richard and Heber step up to the mark. They're going to hopefully repair a lot of the machines.
Just for some background for people who don't know, Richard's company Heber are an electronics company, and they are the company that have partnered with Neil on the Mr. Multi-system that we've talked about before.
That's correct.
So they are expertly placed.
Yeah, this is a partnership between all three of us, and that's what's great. We all bring something to the table, and it's brilliant. It's working out really well. But for anyone looking to get into the hobby, which I think your question was really aimed at, join UK VAC. There's plenty of people on there that help you out, and you can find cheap cabs still. They're out there. You just got to keep looking, and you will get lucky. There are cheap games out there. There's lots of cocktails that are cheap to pick up.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of friendly people on the forum that will help you out with all of that. As far as space is concerned, I can't help you there. I've struggled. I think every collector struggles with space. It's their bane of their life.
But what about, what's your take? We talked before the episode, you talked about Skyskipper coming to the Switch. I think we were saying, because, we're both big fans of our Nintendo Switches. One of the things I was saying is, from my point of view, the Switch is kind of one of the best ways to enjoy some retro games on a portable, but also, TV-based system. Yeah, it's not going to be obviously original hardware, but I guess the question is, what's your take on things like the Switch? And if we go maybe a little bit broader in terms of things like, now, I'm not going to call the Mr. system emulation because it's not, but let's say Mr. and then maybe, my personal favorite, RetroPie. What do you think that's an accessible way for people to play some of these games? Or
definitely, without a doubt. You've got to be playing the games first and foremost. That's the most important thing. Play the games on any means you can. I've got Pi in one of my Jammer cabs just to play through some of the games I haven't played before. You couldn't collect all of the PCBs.
No.
Too expensive. And some of the arcade machines, the boards are constantly going down. There's been a lot of people come forward and make FPGA boards. You've got the J-Rock board for the Williams games that you can just plug in, so you haven't got to worry. And you can still have the original boards in the machine, but you run it off an FPGA board, and every time you turn it on, you can get a game in.
Because that's one thing. That's one thing I forgot about, of course, is that there are jammer adapters for the Pi. So you can, if you want to go out and build. I mean, there's guides out there on people building.
I've got one. It was in front of me. Where is it? I've got one somewhere. Yeah, I've got a Pi to jammer set up that I can just plug in and just go through all the games. It's brilliant, and that's the best way to do it. But from a museum's point of view, you want to really have it as original as possible. That's the whole point. Otherwise, you're just emulating what you've got at home, what everyone else has got. And there is a difference, because a lot of the games, especially sort of the early pioneering games where they were a bit of a hybrid, really, they were still using logic and solid state together. They had solid state for a lot of the graphics, but a lot of the sound was still coming from logic, TTL stuff. Like Seawolf and that, they had loads of boards inside. And when you play that game on MAME, all the sounds are wrong. Some MAME dev has just gone there and made the sounds up,
And there's something magical as well. I always remember going into the arcades, maybe the bigger ones, and just that soundscape of all the noises. I mean, it's one of the things I love about your intro video to your channel. You get that hit of just arcade noise.
Yes. Yeah,
and it is so nostalgic.
Yeah.
And again, using, as you said, there will be differences in, like, Space Invaders. Unless you've set up a Pepper's Ghost yourself, you're not going to get that original feel.
Exactly.
You're not going to see some of the, the innovations. So, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Play the games, get used to the games, and then come and experience the original, how it was meant to be played.
Yeah, and try and imagine everything that's come after those games. Try and imagine that they never existed. And you've walked in this room for the first time, you've never played a video game before in your life, and you see Space Invaders. That's what it was like for us kids, There was no other games around, That was it. That's how incredible it was. It's almost like, for my dad's generation, what rock and roll was for those guys, It was a whole new sound. It started a whole new scene. That's what video games was for us, like the rock and roll for my dad's era, Just a completely new sound and thing.
That's a good point, because now, kids of today, they've got on their phones, they've got games. I mean, I have on here from Apple Arcade the Galaga Wars.
Yeah.
Which is a great game on the phone.
Yeah.
But it's nothing compared with the original.
No.
When you've got kids, and people like, anyone really, being able to experience games wherever they go, rather than it being almost a special experience, a treat, as it were. As you said, going on holiday, being given your spends. Because my resounding memory of my nana is that she would always give me and my sister spends every summer.
Yeah.
And we could spend it on whatever we want to. Yeah. And, we would go to the arcades, and we would play just random things. I mean, I loved playing the racing games. Because I can't drive, I always like to imagine I could. I was no good at the games either, to be fair. So, thankfully I'm not on the road. So, Alex, this has been such a pleasure. It's been such a wonderful trip. I'm genuinely excited to see what you do with this museum space. And I will say right here on public record, as soon as I have the means to get over, once you are up and running, I'm going to do a double whammy visit and come and visit you and Neil. Because, as you said, what a compliment.
Yeah, I love it. I love that you want to come down, and anyone else that wants to come down, because you will be blown away when it's all finished. It's going to be amazing. It already is amazing what Neil's done there. It's amazing. So when I first met Neil and Richard, I walked up there. I'll never forget that day. I went there. My first impressions of Neil and Richard were sort of on the sideline. They were behind this kind of bar area. And they went, "It's Alex, right?" And then I was just I didn't even look at them for a minute. I was just looking at all these games and all these computers. I was like, jaw just dropped. Hi, Richard. Hi, Neil. This is amazing.
That's what everyone who's been to the cave has said, and
Yeah.
I cannot advocate. I also want to say, of course, that I do focus a lot on Neil, but there are some also wonderful computing museums around the country, and as you said, there are some wonderful arcade clubs and arcade bars. I think go and check out your local arcade space.
Yeah, one thing what's great about what Neil's doing, he's got volunteers there. I mean, I'm there. I like just going there and being a volunteer and chatting to the cave dwellers as they come through the door. I love it. I love talking to people about the hobby. And, people like that. They like being shown around and shown and being told a bit of the history instead of just reading a little bit of it. We can tell them a little bit more about it as well as play. I like to play games with them. I'm quite competitive. So it's like, come on then, let's try and beat my score. Come on.
Nice.
And it gets people, really pumped up for it.
And again, it's going to be a great experience. So I'm really excited. So, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find you and your channel online?
My YouTube channel is Nintendo Arcade. But we're obviously going to have to change that soon. As soon as we've got the name for the museum, I'm going to change the name so it coincides with that. So all my videos will be done from the museum.
Right.
You can find me on Facebook, Ninty Arcade, and Instagram as well, Nintendo Arcade.
Brilliant. Yeah, I was going to say, because Nintendo might have a few things to say about you calling your museum Nintendo Arcade.
Yeah, well, I think they have already checked me out because obviously the Sky Skipper thing, they wanted to see how it was legit. So they have already seen my channel. But I think at that point it was so small. But if it grows, they might have a concern about it. But yeah, it doesn't bother me to change the name anyway, to be honest with you.
I mean, you could be creative, because this is wonderful.
To be honest, we do have a name in our head, but I can't mention it at the moment until we've got the domain name for it.
Don't let anyone go and get my domain. I mean, one of my other favourite Nintendo, but this is more modern Nintendo YouTubers, Nintendo. What a wonderful channel name. He's an American chap, and he does more of a modern, the modern era. Yeah,
I love all that too. I love watching the modern stuff as well. See what's happening.
I mean, some of my favourite games are on the Switch. When I think about the games that I enjoy playing socially.
Yes.
Mario Kart.
Yeah, we didn't touch on the Switch. Do you
know what? Let's talk about the Switch quickly.
Yeah, because I've got over 100 games on the Switch. I'm a massive physical collector of the Switch. I don't, unless it's not getting a physical release ever, I'll download it if it's a good game, but I'd much prefer the physical release. I've got a lot of retro-inspired games on the Switch, a lot of arcade special editions like the Darius box set, the Castlevania box set. I've got, the Neo Geo games on there, R-Types, and loads of arcade ports. Are just amazing. It really
and of
is.
Course, if you're a Switch Online subscriber, you get Nintendo's. On a base Switch Online, you get a load of NES games and a load of SNES games as well.
Yeah.
So going back to that 16-bit era when, as you said, games became less and less compelling to put your money into the arcade because you had such great games at home. It's like that line, isn't it? No, we've got Nintendo at home, darling.
Exactly.
And actually, you do.
Yeah.
I think there's something magical about the Switch because, again, it's a portable system that, plays really well on TV. Most of my time is spent on the TV, but there's just something, the games, particularly Nintendo first-party games. I think of things like Mario Kart. Recently, I got the Super Mario All-Star, 3D All-Stars pack. But you also, as you said, we're also seeing like R-Type coming out there, and also some older top-level games. The Switch on paper has a terrible processor and is really underpowered. But game devs seem to be able to really push it. Like I played the 2016 Doom on my Switch because at the time I didn't have a system capable of running it.
Yeah, it plays fine.
It does. We take out some of the detail, but it plays fine, as you said.
Yeah.
And there's some other wonderful games. I'm just such a big fan of that as a console. I think, maybe we get spoiled. I've never been into the whole PS5 and the latest Xbox, latest PlayStation. I've had Xbox consoles, but...
Well, I think it's time. I mean, I've got a PS4 and I started playing Elden Ring, which is right up my street. It's Dungeons and Dragons, which I was into back in the day. And the creations, the imagination that these game developers have for these enemies is just out of this world. It's just incredible to see. But the game is so huge. And it doesn't hold your hand, just throws you straight out there, which is great, but it's massive. And I just don't have that time to invest in it. I'd much rather have a quick blast on an arcade game, try and beat my old score, and then upload it to the group and see if someone can beat me. It's just a little bit, because we all got busy lives, We're not teenagers anymore sitting around in our bedroom for days on end finishing games, are we?
Well, speak for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, if Zelda comes along, I always make an effort to finish Zelda. There's a couple of games I always make an effort to finish: Zelda, Metroid, Castlevania. Those are the sort of 3 main games that I like to finish when they do come out, because they're such a joy to play.
I'm such a huge fan of Breath of the Wild as a game. Amazing. That puzzle mechanic. And, some of my favourite memories have been watching my mum, and Mum, if you're listening, it's true, play Mario Kart.
Yeah.
It's just hilarious. And my nephew being incredibly cheeky whenever I lose, which is most of the time. So,
do you like turn-based games, turn-based strategy games?
I do. I love turn-based strategy.
You played Mario Rabbids?
I haven't. I keep meaning to get that. There's a game I mean to pick up, but we've remade for the Switch, the Advance Wars remake.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's another good one.
Because I had that on the Game Boy Advance.
Yeah. Mario Rabbids was just an absolute joy to play. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Julian Gollop, who developed a lot of games for Sinclair Spectrum, and then he went on to make some more famous games like XCOM on the PS1, and Mario Rabbids is kind of a fun take on that. It's just brilliant with the Nintendo characters. I love it.
I don't think you can go wrong with the Switch, honestly, and I highly recommend it as a way to get into some of those games. And if it's, again, if you don't have a gaming PC or don't have a console, the Switch is a great option. Yeah. So, yeah.
I'm going to play Sky Skipper as well on the Switch.
Yeah, do you know what? I'm actually going to go. I'm going to go and get it now.
Yeah.
Literally, that's on my list to go and grab. So, and I'll put a link to the. Don't hit me, Alex. I'll put a link to the eShop. Link to it.
That's fine. Yeah. At least people can play it.
Yeah. I mean, I like physical copies too, especially. But sometimes if there's an eShop sale, you can't go wrong.
Got to.
Back to our regularly scheduled outro. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. You can check out the show notes for this episode, which will include links to Alex's channel and lots of good stuff that we've mentioned. I'll try and put as much information about some of the games we talked about in there as well. Head over to crosswires.net and you'll find the show notes for this episode. You can also subscribe there to the Substack newsletter, which basically will let you get emails for all of our posts, all of our episodes. You can also find us in all the major podcast platforms. And of course, if you're a Good Pods listener, do start a discussion on this episode. We'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear people's arcade memories. So you can either put those in comments on the post itself, put them in Good Pods, or email podcast@crosswires.net, or tweet us at crosswiresmg. Thank you everyone for listening. We will see you next week. Oh, and one thing to say, Alex, you have the honour of being the last episode of Crosswires to ever be recorded in this current studio.
Hooray.
Which, for listeners who remember the old version of Crosswires, this is the Mysterious Housemate Memorial Studio. And yeah, I move out in a few days, so I've been rushing to get episodes together. But yeah, this is the last episode of Crosswires in the current location, so thank you, Alex.
Oh, well, good luck with the move. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.
My absolute pleasure, sir. Take care.
Bye-bye.